Chapter 5. Not again. A minute after they reached the gravel bar, Eric came wading out of the creek. His teeth were chattering. He dropped the wire and hugged himself with his arms as he stood shivering in the hot sun. Boy, that water is cold. We're going to freeze when we go after Oscar. Forget the crayfish until I get Dad's mitt back. Scott tossed the bucket aside. I'm going to look for Tiger. He followed the creek around the bend, expecting to see Tiger come swaggering out of the woods to meet him. Tiger wasn't there. And threw Dad's mitt into the creek, Scott thought. He peered into the shallow water near Oscar's hole under the big rock. The crystal clear water rushed over the stones out in the creek, leaving a calmer backwater near the hole. There were a few old leaves and twigs on the bottom, but no sign of Dad's mitt. Scott breathed a sigh of relief until he remembered that Tiger could have thrown the mitt into the woods. Come help me hunt for Dad's mitt, Scott called. I think Tiger might have thrown it into the woods. If it's here, we'll find it, said Rusty. Kev and Eric split up and began to search among the bushes and trees. Scott, why are you looking for Dad's mitt here? Raymond asked. He'd forgotten Raymond was there. Scott had to stop and explain what happened. I haven't told Dad yet, he admitted. I want to get the mitt back first, so don't tell Dad. I want to tell him myself, okay? Raymond nodded, and Scott hurried to join the search. The tan mitt would be hard to see among the dry brown leaves. There's no sign of Tiger or the mitt, Rusty said, coming out of the woods with Kev and Eric. I don't think Tiger has been here yet. Let's eat lunch while we're waiting for him, said Eric. They went back to the gravel bar where Eric had left his pack. He opened it and got a funny look on his face. Water dribbled from Kev's soggy lunch sack as Eric lifted it up. Then the bottom fell out and dumped waterlogged sandwiches and mushy cookies at Eric's feet. What happened to my lunch? Kev howled. I forgot all about the lunches when I jumped into the creek to get away from the mosquitoes. Eric turned his pack over and dumped everything out. It's ruined, he moaned, sorting through the wet sacks and soggy wrappers. There's not one thing in here fit to eat. I'll be glad to share my lunch with y'all, Raymond said, taking off his pack. You brought a lunch too? Eric's face brightened. Yes. Raymond spread out his lunch, one peanut butter sandwich, two chocolate chip cookies, and a very small apple. Eric stared in disbelief. That's it? That's all you brought? Eric looked at the four thick, waterlogged sandwiches in his own lunch and sighed. Divided 5 ways, they would each get about 2 bites of Raymond's lunch. Scott reached over and picked up the apple. I'll take this. Raymond divided the sandwich into quarters and broke the cookies in half. Lunch was over in 3 minutes. There's no use sitting around, said Rusty, getting to his feet and dusting off the seat of his pants. Let's go catch Oscar while we're waiting for Tiger to show up. Good idea, said Kev. They gathered up their equipment and went back to the crayfish hole. May I help? Raymond asked, with an eager note in his voice. No, you just get in the way. Scott pulled off his shoes and socks. Go look at the plants and stuff, but don't wander off in the woods and get lost. Everybody ready? Rusty asked. They all nodded. Let's go. Quietly, they stepped into the icy creek and formed a half circle around the crayfish hole. Scott picked a spot upstream. the long-handled nets at the ready to scoop up their prey. Downstream from the hole, Eric unrolled the rabbit wire and pushed it into the stony stream bed to keep Oscar from escaping in that direction. Rusty unwound the line from the fishing pole and dropped the rubber worm in front of Oscar's hole. The current made the worm wiggle invitingly. Soon the tip of a claw appeared from the shadowy darkness. With lightning speed, the claw snapped up the rubber worm and disappeared back into the hole. The line went taut. Pull him out! Pull him out! Kev shouted. Rusty tugged. Slowly, Oscar slid out of the hole, one claw still fastened tightly to the worm, one raised and open, ready to fight. Lift him up! Kev moved the net closer. The minute the crayfish came out of the water, he let go of the worm and fell back into the stream with a splash. Using his fantail like an oar, he swam backward towards the safety of his hole. Kev leaped forward and dropped the net over the opening. Oscar swam right into it. Gotcha! Kev jerked the net up and climbed out of the stream. Eric tossed the wire up on the bank and rushed to see their catch. Wow! Look at the size of him, said Rusty. Oscar stared up at them with his black, beady eyes, snapping and clacking his claws. I don't think he likes being out of the water. Scott reached down and scooped up half a pailful and set the bucket on the edge of the bank. Kev shook Oscar into it. He's over 6 inches, said Rusty, kneeling beside the bucket. Alan said he'd pay $10 if Rusty was over 6 inches. Scott! Raymond came running from the woods like he was being chased. Scott, look what I found. Raymond's feet tangled in the wire. He lurched into Rusty. Rusty fell forward, knocking over the bucket. The water gushed back into the stream, taking Oscar with it. Don't let him get away! Rusty leaped into the creek, but it was already too late. Oscar jetted downstream and was gone. Now we'll never catch him, Rusty howled. Didn't you watch what you were doing? Scott muttered as he helped Raymond to his feet. I'm sorry, Scott. I was in a hurry to show you this. Raymond held out the paper still clutched in his hand. It was a note, another note from Tiger. Scott unfolded it and read, If you want your rent back, be at the old house in the woods tomorrow at noon. Scott grabbed Raymond by the arm. Where did you get this? Over there, on that red huckleberry bush, Raymond said, pointing to the light green bush near the bend in the creek. We searched there a little while ago, said Kev. The note wasn't there then. Tiger must have put it there while we were catching Oscar. Maybe he's still here. Help me find him. Scott knew it was hopeless as he ran into the woods. There were too many places Tiger could hide. Tiger, you better come out, Scott yelled as he rushed from tree to tree and looked behind bushes. He couldn't hear Kev, Eric, and Raymond. He could hear Kev, Eric, and Raymond crashing through the woods in different directions. When Scott finally gave up and went back to the creek, the other boys were waiting. I guess he got away. Eric, red-faced and panting, stopped to rest. So did Oscar, Rusty grumbled as he waded out of the creek. Let's get out of here. He didn't say another word as they trudged back up the trail and started home. Don't feel so bad about Oscar, said Kev, as they trudged along. There are lots of other ways to make money. Rusty glared at him. Not $10 all at once. They walked on. Nobody said anything about going to the old house. If they didn't come along, Scott would have to face Tiger all alone. There had to be a way. Suddenly, Scott had an idea that stopped him in his tracks. I know how you can make lots of money. How? Asked Rusty. Remember all that junk we saw the last time we went to the old house? Well, Mr. Higgins has some of that same old-timey junk in the window of his antique shop, and a sign that says, "We buy and sell." If we bring him some good junk, I bet he'd pay more than $10. You'll have your half of the money for your new bike and some left over. I'm not so sure. Rusty sounded doubtful. Let's go down to the antique shop and look at the stuff in the window, said Kev. Then we'll know what to bring back from the old house. Everybody walked a little faster. It was almost dinner time when Scott and Raymond got home. The tantalizing aroma came coming from the kitchen made Scott's mouth water. It had been a long time since breakfast. Without waiting for Raymond, he headed for the back door. Before he got to the steps, Mom came out to meet them. Where have you boys been? She looked past Scott. Where's Raymond? Is he? Mom put her fingers over her lips and stared over Scott's shoulder. Oh my goodness, she whispered. Scott turned around. Raymond was coming up the walk. He did look sort of different. The bill of his cap stuck out over his left ear, and his face was dirty. His t-shirt and jeans and sneakers were streaked with mud. He didn't look so pale anymore either. Raymond had gotten a sunburn on the way home. Raymond, are you all right? Mom rushed down the steps to meet him. Raymond kept telling her he was fine, but she was still fussing over him when Dad arrived home a few minutes later. Peter, come look at this boy, she called. Dad got out of his truck with his lunch pail in his hand and strode up the back walk. When he saw Raymond up close, Dad grinned. Well, sport, did you have a good time? Yes, it was very interesting. Raymond grinned back. Now that everyone had looked Raymond over, Scott hoped he could get on with dinner before he keeled over from starvation. But Dad had other ideas. He went into the house and came back with the camera. Scott, stand over there with Raymond. It isn't every day your brother goes on his first hike. Scott didn't want his picture taken, but he figured if he was ever going to get anything to eat, he'd better smile and get it over with. He draped his arm around Raymond's shoulder, pulled his lips back to show his teeth, and tried not to squint into the camera. That's going to make a great picture, Dad said. Then, just to make sure one came out, he took three more. Before Mom put dinner on the table, she made Raymond take a bath and Scott take a shower. It was a good thing they had two bathrooms, Scott decided. The way things were going, it might be hours before he got anything to eat. So far, it had been a crummy day, and it was all Tiger's fault. Scott was pulling a clean t-shirt over his head when Mom called him to dinner. He raced downstairs to find Raymond already at the table, washed and combed, looking like his old self except for the scratches. After Dad asked the blessing, he grinned at Raymond and said, Tell us about your hike, sport. Between bites, Raymond told them about the whole trip, down the creek and back. Almost. He left out the part about Tiger and Dad's mitt. He wasn't such a bad kid after all. You boys had quite a day, said Dad. Where are you going tomorrow? Now, Pete, Mom cut in, Raymond needs time to rest. Raymond did look sort of tired. He must have been hungry, too. Even with all the talking, he managed to eat twice as much as usual. He sat up a little straighter in his chair and said, I'm fine, Mom. Tomorrow we're going to ride our bikes out to that old house in the woods, and there won't be any traffic. Scott was glad he remembered to add that part. Mom worried about that sort of stuff. Good idea, Dad agreed. Mom just pressed her lips together in a tight, thin line and didn't say anything. Scott decided he would try harder to keep Raymond out of trouble tomorrow, so Mom wouldn't have to worry. But what kind of trouble could Raymond get into just riding his bike on an old, deserted road?